Good afternoon, everybody. It's a delight to be here. Thank you for coming to this session. A decent number of people can look like a small group in a big room like this, but as we say in show business, there are no small audiences, only small performers. I live in Washington, D.C. I run the American Enterprise Institute, where I've been the president for about 3 years, and I'm not from Washington. I'm actually from Seattle, Washington. In Seattle, Washington. All right. Which is to say that all of the freedom-loving people from Seattle are now not in Seattle, between you and me. I grew up in a liberal household of artists and musicians and academics in Seattle. You might wonder how I came to my ideology. My brother's theory is that I was dropped on my head a lot as a kid. And my mother figured out that something was up with the way that I think sometime in my mid-20s. And at one point we were having a conversation. Sometime in my mid-20s, I was visiting for Christmas, and my mother said, I have a personal question to ask you. And I said, what is it? I thought it was going to be something. That's a terrible conversation with your mother. I have a personal question to ask you. She said, have you been voting for Republicans? It gives you a little bit of an idea where I'm coming from. But I'm not from Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is a very tough place, particularly right now. It's acrimonious and pretty chaotic right now with the fights over the budget battles and the debt ceiling and such. One of the pieces of advice that I got when I first came to Washington, D.C. is that you know your friends in Washington because they're the ones who stab you in the chest. For those of us who love freedom, we've gotten stabbed a lot in the past decade, in the chest by our friends. In 2000, 2002, 2004, 2006, boy oh boy, did we get stabbed a lot in the chest. 2004, we had Medicare Part D, the largest increase in entitlement spending in American history, passed by a Republican president. We had 55,000 earmarks signed in legislation in the Bush administration without one veto because of abusive spending. And then, of course, in 2008, things, believe it or not, took a turn for the worse. The good news is that you took to the streets because you'd had enough. When enough is enough, people turn to action, and you did. The Tea Party rebellion, of course, was a thrilling thing for me and for most of you. It took center stage in American politics, and it led to some pretty great things. It led to November 2nd, 2010, which was an exciting night for me. I suspect it was for you, too, when Republicans gained 63 seats in the House, 680 legislative seats around the country, and went from 23 governorships to 29. Now, a lot of conservatives and a lot of free market advocates were saying that night, we're winning again. Nothing can stop us. Free enterprise is back. But, if you have any friends who are leftists and they're smart and you get a couple beers into them, they'll say, you're not winning. You guys are losing. You've been losing for a long time. And I don't like to hear it, but you know what? I got the data, and they don't look so good for us. Let me give you an example. In 1913, government as a percentage of GDP, and by that I mean state, federal, and local government spending altogether as a percentage of GDP was 8%. By 1940, at the end of the New Deal reforms, which was a huge run-up in government, the percentage of GDP dedicated to government was 15%. By 1980, when Ronald Reagan became president, it was 30%. By the time he left the White House, it was 32%. When George W. Bush left the White House, it was 33%. Today it's 36%. According to the Bureau of Economic Analysis of the Department of Commerce, in other words, the Obama administration, that will be 50% by the year 2038. 1/2 of everything this country produces will be laundered through the government by the year 2038. 1970, our debt was 40% of GDP. Today it's 100% of GDP. By the year 2030, it will be 200% of GDP. That comes from the Congressional Budget Office. That's not made up by some right-wing think tank. My friends, this is the road to serfdom. That's what it looks like. I'm not making these numbers up. We know we're going into hock. We know that the growth of government is going one way and not coming back. We can celebrate all we want, these great victories for the Tea Party and for conservative Republicans who said they're going to turn things around, but that was just a good start. That wasn't a permanent victory. It's not even a flesh wound as far as the statists are concerned. They think it's going to be a flash in the pan. They think you're going to forget. They think you'll become complacent and we'll go back to the status quo. You know, this is kind of a paradox in American politics, I have to say. And you know, here's what's puzzling. When you ask Americans what they want, they don't want that. The Pew Research Center last year asked a large group of Americans, do you believe the free market system is the best system for America's economy, despite severe ups and downs? You know what they said? 70% said yes. 70% think that the free market economy is best. Resurgent Republic asked, do you prefer larger government with more services and higher taxes, or less government with fewer services for you and lower taxes? 69% said they wanted less government and lower services even to them. 7 out of 10 Americans wants free enterprise, but the government grows, and it grows and grows. It's like nothing can stop it. Now, guys like me, I mean, I'm a professional economist, have been screaming about the economics of this stuff for decades. For decades, during the Reagan administration when it didn't stop, during the Bush administration when it didn't stop, let alone the Democratic administrations when it accelerated, saying, we're going to the edge of a cliff. We can't sustain this. You're taking away our economic liberties through over-regulation. You're spending too much of our money. You're taking away the entrepreneurial spirit of this country. You're robbing our future. But we did it all in economic terms. It's time for a better strategy. It's time for a different kind of language. It's time for economists like me and people who care about freedom like you to stop talking just about economic efficiency. And it's time for us to start talking about the morality of what's going on. Now, we don't like to talk about morality very much because it reminds us of the 90s when we were in the culture wars of God, guns, gays, and abortions. We don't want to go back to those days because they were very divisive, and a lot of people who are in the freedom movement feel very uncomfortable with that language. But it's not historic that we should be uncomfortable with the language of morality. Our founders were very comfortable talking about morality, and morality when it came to freedom. 1,000 times you've heard about our unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, here's something you probably don't know. That language was taken from the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which was written 30 days earlier by George Mason. And the Virginia Declaration of Rights didn't talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That document talked about life, liberty, and the means of acquiring and possessing property. That's what George Mason talked about. Now, the Declaration of Independence of the United States largely took the language from that document, but not that part. Why not? Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin were discussing this very passage and believed that this new republic needed a moral basis, not a material one. They said that essentially, by today's language, that a materialistic language for this great country wasn't good enough. What we needed was the moral basis that people would understand. They were willing to make the moral case. Now, there's a lot of social science research out there about morality, and what we're finding today in the data is the same thing that Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin knew. People respond to morality, not to materialism. The problem today, in a nutshell, is that the left wing talks about morality, and we counter with materialism, and they walk away with the prize. Now, the irony is that the left wing has a completely materialistic philosophy of life. Poverty is a cultural problem. They believe it can be solved with welfare checks, and they say it's social justice. We, on the other hand, are motivated by the moral case. Freedom and opportunity are written on your hearts. But we get stuck talking only about economic efficiency. We have the moral case that we wrap in efficiency in materialistic terms. They have pure, cold, calculating materialism that they wrap in moral terms, and they walk off with the prize. The reason that they do is because what researchers know and our founders knew is that people respond to morality. People will literally respond hours earlier to a moral impulse as opposed to a material impulse. And if we cannot adopt a moral language for the crisis that faces our nation today, we're simply going to continue to lose. So what I submit to you here today are the two moral arguments that we need to make. If we want to turn this thing around, if we want to win, we have to make two moral arguments. The first is that the free enterprise system is the system that makes us happy. The second is that the free enterprise system is the fairest system. Let me take each of these in turn. Now, when the founders were talking about the pursuit of happiness and the Declaration of Independence, they weren't talking about making a lot of money. We make this mistake a lot. The pursuit of happiness means the pursuit of economic activity, and the reason for that is we want to get rich. That's wrong, according to the founders, and it's also wrong according to what economists understand about human development. There's a lot of studies that asks whether or not people get happier as they get richer, and the answer is no. When we compare rich countries and poorer countries, as long as people in these poor countries are not dying of starvation or preventable diseases, richer countries are not happier than poorer countries. The average French citizen is 1/3 as happy as the average Mexican, despite having 3 times as much disposable income. The French are not happy, which might make you happy, for all I know. Getting richer over time as a country doesn't make citizens happier. In 1972, 31% of Americans said they were very happy. This year, 31% of Americans still say that they're very happy, despite the fact that we have 150% more average purchasing power, and every segment of the population has gotten richer. We even have studies on what happens to individuals when they suddenly get much richer. The answer is they don't get happier. If they don't even earn the income, people who hit the lottery are significantly unhappier for the rest of their lives. That's what we find. Money and happiness are not causally related. It's what we find. This we know. What do we really seek? There's an answer to that. We know the answer to it. In the pursuit of happiness, what we really crave is earned success. Earned success is the belief that you have created value in your life for the life of other people. When people believe they've earned their success, they become the happiest people. We have data from the General Social Survey, which is collected by the University of Chicago. It's the definitive source on social data in the United States. If you take 2 people in the United States today who are exactly the same age, same religion, same education, they live in the same town, they both believe that they have earned their success, but one earns 8 times as much money as the second. They will be equally happy according to the data. Now, in America today, richer people tend to be happier than poorer people, but it is because of the earned success and not because of the money that they are happier. The secret to a happy life is the pathway to earned success. So how do you get earned success? You need a system that matches your skills with your passions. You need a system that lets you keep what you earn. You need a moral system. That's the free enterprise system that I'm talking about, of course. That's the only system in which people can effectively earn their success, which is the first moral promise of the free enterprise system. Now, what about fairness? If you're listening at all to what's going on in Washington, D.C., which I don't recommend, but if you are, you notice that the President of the United States is going on and on and on about fairness. He says it's not fair that the rich are not paying a bigger portion of what he says he hopes will be debt reduction. He says it's not fair that the rich don't pay a larger share of the deficit. And he wants to raise their taxes because of fairness. He said openly we need to spread the wealth around. He said openly that we need a better sense of fairness and balance in our tax code. Now, that means there's only one interpretation of that. To have a fairer America, according to this president, you got to bring the top down. You can't do it by bringing the bottom up, because the only reason that we have as much income inequality as we do is because the top 1% of earners have done so much better than the rest of us over the past 20 years. The only way you can get more equality is by bringing the top down, which this president intends to do. That's how you get something that's fairer. Now, fairness is a really tough concept. Milton Friedman was uncomfortable talking about fairness because he says you can't define it. And if you can't define it, it doesn't really mean anything, so let's forget about it. But that's a dangerous thing to do. People want fairness. That's like basically saying disregard love because you can't define it. Well, that's a pretty bad idea. Most of us are kind of motivated by love, even though we can't define it. Most of us are motivated by fairness, too. Turns out there are a couple of different definitions of it. Most people disagree with the president's. We see different definitions of fairness around us all the time. I have a house full of kids, little kids. Actually, I only have 3, but it feels like 10. And my kids fight all the time. And they're fighting over things a lot. So I can imagine that my kids, there's one cookie left. And there's an argument. One of my kids will say, I want it, I deserve it, it's not fair that I don't get it because you had more than I did. Another kid will say, I deserve it because I helped Mom make them. In a nutshell, those are the 2 definitions of fairness. Redistributive fairness, which is to say it's fair if it's more equal, and meritocratic fairness, which is to say it's fair if you earned it. Now, those are the 2 big definitions, and you got to decide which one you believe in because you can't believe in both. We know which one the president believes in. His words, quote, the top 1% saw their income rise by an average of more than $250,000 each. And that's who needs to pay less in taxes? We need a sense of fairness in our tax code. He believes that greater equality of income, more redistribution will make a fairer country, spreading the wealth around. Now, there are some obvious logical problems with this. Question number 1, when will we get fair? How much do we have to redistribute before we're fair, according to the President of the United States? Today, 5% of Americans pay 59% of the federal income tax. That's going up and up and up. In 1980, that was 35%. Today, it's 59%. 51% of Americans pay 0 federal income tax, despite the fact that 2/3 of Americans, including a majority of people who pay nothing, think everybody should pay something. It's not entirely clear whether they know they're not paying. 70% of Americans today are net takers from the tax system. Did you know that? 7 out of 10 Americans take more from the tax system than they pay in. We're a welfare nation. If our system isn't fair yet, what's going to make it fair? When 5% pay 75% or 95%? How about when 1% pays 99% and covers all the rest of us? Sounds to me like we'll never be fair as long as anybody has anything more than anybody else. Now, that's the ideology that dominates the left in America today. The day before yesterday, Senator Barbara Boxer from California, your personal favorite, I know, said this about the American rich. Quote, I wish I were making this up, but I'm not. Quote, this is America. This isn't pre-revolutionary France where the king had everything. Unquote. I'm kind of glad she doesn't have a guillotine, because it would be pretty bad. So what's the other kind of fairness out there? It's meritocratic fairness, where people keep what they honestly earn. According to the idea that rewarding merit is fair, rewards should go to hard work, ingenuity, and innovation. And penalties should go for corruption, stupidity, free riding, laziness, and incompetence. That's kind of not politically correct to say, but you got to say it. People get what they deserve. If you work harder than others, then inequality is actually fair. If you work harder than others, equality is unfair. We need more serious arguments against equality. It's a weird thing to say, I realize. I realize we're going to be on C-SPAN and I'm going to get email. I can't believe it. I can't believe that you argued against equality. Of course I'm arguing against equality. We need more inequality in this country because we need more meritocratic fairness. Which definition do Americans prefer? Redistributive fairness or meritocratic fairness? The World Values Survey, which is conducted every year over a large sample of people in 35 countries, asked this question: whether you prefer merit or redistribution, which do you think is fair? 89% of Americans prefer merit. 11% prefer redistribution. That's really different than other countries. I'll tell you about that in a second. But the question really is why? And the answer is because we believe we live in an opportunity society. And when you live in an opportunity society, you should reward merit. The General Social Survey says that going back to 1972, every year since then, never less than 60% of Americans have said that they believe that good things come to people because of hard work as opposed to lucky breaks. There's always a clear majority. Generally, it's closer to 70% of Americans. Actually, this is the great theme that we see over and over again. 70% of Americans agree with you. The trouble is they keep getting statism slipped in while they're not looking at it, which is the reason we need this whole new argument. You're right, incidentally, that we are an opportunity society. You hear a lot from the left that it's a big sham, that people are living kind of in a dream world. But that's wrong. According to the Federal Reserve Bank data, between 2001 and 2007, the bottom 20% of the income distribution, those folks, 44% moved up into a different part of the income distribution between 2001 and 2007. Almost half of the folks at the bottom of the income distribution within a 6-year period moved up into the middle class. Now, here's the other side of that. The top income, the income distribution, the top 20%, 34% of those guys fell out of the top 20%. Fair's fair. A mobile society means you get to move up, but it also means if you're no good, you move down. Actually, that's the kind of country exactly that I want to live in. Now, here's the biggest reason that we should believe we should know we live in an opportunity society. If this weren't an opportunity society, none of our families would have come here. You know, recently my brother and I were looking at letters from our family who came through Ellis Island in about 1903, and they were talking about what they were looking for in the United States. They were desperate to come to the United States, and there's nothing in those letters that suggested they were here because they wanted a fairer system of forced income redistribution. I saw nothing that was reminiscent of cash for clunkers in their letters. They wanted to start a business. Actually, they wanted to start a farm. They wanted to earn their success. They wanted fairness based on merit. That's why they came to this country. If we weren't an opportunity society, your ancestors were pretty stupid. And my guess is that they weren't. Now, this is a big difference between the United States and other countries. We have data, once again, on France. France is my favorite country to look at because they're so different than we are. In 2006, we asked, does hard work bring success? Americans were twice as likely as the French to say yes. And in America, they were probably right. There was another survey 5 years ago that asked people's personal opinion about Bill Gates. Right? What's your opinion about Bill Gates? This is when he was still the richest man in the world. He was worth $55 or $60 billion or something like that. What's your opinion of Bill Gates? And they asked French citizens and American citizens. I'll summarize for you what the results were. The Americans basically said, I hope my kid is the next Bill Gates. The French basically said, let's take his stuff and burn his house down. Societies that don't believe in opportunity are motivated by envy and spite, and that's the American left. In a nutshell, if you want to know what's going on in Washington, D.C., for people who want to redistribute more of your income to others, it's people who are motivated by a society that revolves around envy. That's not the America I want for my kids and for my grandkids. It's not right. So here's the second conclusion. Fairness, for most Americans, means rewarding merit, not penalizing the makers in society who've gotten ahead so we can give more to the takers in society. That's why my ancestors are here. That's what our founders struggled and died to leave to us. Free enterprise is the best system for rewarding merit. If we let statists convince Americans that redistribution is actual fairness, we've failed in our moral duty. We should say every time President Obama talks about fairness that we believe in free enterprise because we believe in fairness too. We need to go toe-to-toe with the statists using their moral language. Let me sum up, and then maybe some of you have some comments I'd like to hear. Winning the fight for free enterprise means that we need a declaration that we believe in free enterprise not because it makes us rich, although it does, but because it makes us happy and because it's truly fair. If we don't say these things, our struggle over the past 2 years will have gone to waste. The Tea Party movement will have been for naught. The statists will take us back to the trends that I talked to you about a little bit earlier. Worst of all, we will have squandered the legacy of America's founders and our own ancestors. The struggle has to start today, not with materialistic arguments about capital gains and carried interest. The struggle needs to start today with moral arguments about what's written on our hearts, about the system that we love, and the country we have high hopes for still today. I know that you are doing this, or you wouldn't be spending this day here in Las Vegas and this hour here with me. On behalf of my country, my kids and grandkids, my last word, therefore, to you is thank you.